morning. I would like to say that I'm very happy to be here today to participate in such interesting conference, and therefore I would like to thank Professor Urbanek and his colleagues for organizing the conference, for inviting me to it and giving me the chance to present some of my research. The title of my presentation is What Connects and What Differentiates Corporate Governance Systems Around the World. It is a very broad topic and very complex, as as corporate governance is itself. It is even difficult to answer how old corporate governance is, because if we look into the literature, the term has been in use since 1970s of the last centuries. But when we trace back the problems of corporate governance, it is possible not only to see them summarized by Adam Smith in his Wealth of Nations from 1776, but we may trace it back to Homer's Odyssey. We may see it in William Shakespeare, Merchant of Venice. So, despite treating corporate governance as a new area of research, it seems that it is very old, as old probably as ownership is. And what is not good, that the problems concerning corporate governance haven't been solved for centuries. One of the problems is to find out if states in the world are trying to convert the systems of corporate governance or not. And from my research, one conclusion is possible to be drawn, that is that most of the countries are not interested in converging corporate governance systems. So, what is the system? I will start with that. System of corporate governance is a more or less country-specific framework of legal, institutional, and cultural factors shaping the pattern in which the owners of the capital, the stakeholders, exert on managerial decisions. Talking about corporate governance, we must remember that it is a very complex area. And the first to divide corporate governance models were Werner and Pape, and they distinguish Anglo-American and continental Japanese model of corporate governance. It was many years ago, and while thinking about corporate governance, I thought that the models will converge, that they will be closer and closer to each other. But the research shows that the situation is not what I expected. There are the differences between the systems are getting more and more visible. Type is the socialist type, and this model is implemented or is being implemented by Russia and China, that the countries try to keep their power in the country, but create impression that there is corporate governance very important. If we talk about the convergence of the models, it is possible to distinguish many factors, and they also depend on the time when the convergence is considered. But trying to find some together. It will be competition across nations, competition across corporate governance system. Then we have social, political factors, corporate internationalization, globalization of financial market, global governance that is imposed by such institutions as International Monetary Fund, World Bank, OECD, and so on. And of course, harmonization of accounting. If we think about the main factors that are diverging the corporate governance system, we should mention legal differences, so case law, codified law. Then we have standards of the legal process, ownership structure, because it is completely different when the owners are family, the companies are family owned, or the shareholders are dispersed. There are stock market differences connected with the scale and the sophistication of the markets, and also very important history, culture, or even to which ethnic group the investors belong. Very important point in economic history even, it is possible to say, was the collapse of Enron in United States in 2001 and the consequences of it, because it showed that the Anglo-American model that was gaining more and more popularity in the world, that many countries started adopting some solutions from that model, it proved that it is not only vulnerable, but also that it shows some systematic weaknesses. And so probably countries start hesitating whether to implant that model or not. I would like to present now one of the countries that even itself called internal Americanization, the processes that were taking part in beginning of the 21st century. But Japan is the country that also shows a very significant resistance to the internal Americanization. When I was thinking why it is happening, so the history of Japan is a good answer to it. It is interesting from 2 points, at least 2 points. The first one is the Edo period, that is 250 years when Japan was completely isolated and was developing only on the basis of own ideas and resources. And then after the Edo period, there is the Meiji period, lasting, let's say, half century, and within that period, Japan was able to turn from the feudalistic country, quite backward as far as technology was developed, into a modern, very powerful country. Each of these periods is amazing to study what was happening there and what was the reaction. Sorry, I have no time to discuss it. But as far as corporate governance system of Japan is concerned, I found in literature 5 stages of development of that system. I would like to add 2 more. One, it will be the system of hybridization, or first it will be Americanization, and the other will be the system of hybridization. Probably it is best to assess that developments. And what are these 2 stages of development of corporate governance? First, we can distinguish 2 waves of changes in Japan after the crisis, after the lost decade. In my opinion, that it was not so much lost. And after the Big Bang reform, in 2005, there was the first wave implementing American solutions to Japanese law. And it was to make Japan more internationally recognized country, to make it easier performing business with it. And if we look at some examples of this change, so for example, here is the 2006 Commercial Code implemented US law into the Japanese legislation system, and as I mentioned earlier, it is called internal Americanization. In 2007, there was the Financial Instruments and Exchange Act that is called the Japanese Sarbanes-Oxley Act. In 2009, the new corporate governance regulations were introduced, and in which international recommendations were included. The second wave, it is 2013. It began in 2013 with the 3 arrows of urbanization. It was the monetary easing, fiscal stimulus, and structural reform. And if we look at the pieces of law that were amended or were completely new in Japan, we can see that the 2014, it is the Principles for Responsible Institutional Investors. So Japan's Stewardship Code is implementing or is based on UK's Stewardship Code. Then we have the regulations on Tokyo Stock Exchange. They are also very similar to the international solution. Japan's Unfair Competition and Prevention Act, it is implementing solutions that are functioning in United States Foreign Corrupt Practices Act and United Kingdom regulation from that area. But Japan is not only limiting itself to Americanization, because in 2016, as the first country in the world, it introduced principle for listed companies dealing with corporate malversances. And this is also introducing the externalization to Japanese companies. So perhaps if we assess Japan's corporate governance system, it is possible to say that at most it is hybridization, so bringing some international regulations into the system. And examples are the construction of supervisory boards, 3 possibilities to choose. And of course, it is also trying to preserve the traditional way of managing the company. It is the statutory auditors, it is to protect lifetime employment, seniority system, and the corporate trade unions. And I'm afraid I have to stop here because my time has run to the end. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much for your excellent presentation, and that you left some time for discussion. And now I would like to open up the floor for questions, comments. Okay, as the chairman, I have the privilege to control discussion, so maybe I could ask the first question. In your paper, you pointed out the main feature of national corporate governance models, and you concluded that differences in institutional environment do not allow for the process of convergence toward a sort of universal model. But each national model has its advantages and disadvantages. For example, German practice that there's a separation of the role of the chief executive officer and the chairman of the board is better, in my opinion, than American one, in which the same person usually occupies these two positions. So my question is, if you had to define one, not four as you did in your paper, one model consisting of the best national corporate governance practices, how would this model look like? Which Polish, German, Japanese standards should be implemented to create such model?
Thank you for the question. I think it is very difficult to answer it, because if anybody knew how to create such model, it probably will be functioning in the world. In my opinion, each of them have some cons or good and bad sides, some drawbacks. And from German model and Japanese model, because Japanese model is based on German one from the end of 19th century, I will take, let's call it co-determination, the role of employees in the company. There's a very interesting book written by Professor Itami, in which he asked very controversial question. For example, why shareholders should be main beneficiaries from the company? What is their role in the company? They supply capital to the company, and that's all. But how to use the capital, it is the responsibility of the managers of the company and employees. So in his opinion, the most important in the company are the very well qualified and skillful employees. So it is one, to make people interested in, well, in the work, in the company, and also that they are able to participate in the fruits of their work. From Anglo-American model, I would probably choose the factors that stimulate efficiency, not the market value, because I think the maximization of market value is the one of the main reasons of the difficulties of scandals that companies are and the society is suffering of. Because if the managers are oriented towards the maximization of the market price, they do it in legal and illegal work. If we compare Enron, it was, let's say, just done for private reasons, to be the best, to get the most benefits of it. If I compare it to the Japanese scandals, for example, the one of the latest Toshiba scandal, it also has the same purpose. It means to maximize value of the company, but it was done not because of, let's say, personal reasons, but because they were not able to stand the way the company was managed by the managers. But in both cases, the result was disaster. So from Anglo-American model, I will take the efficiency. From German co-determination, and I mean, well, participation of people, and from both ethical easy, because if the company works, it should work in an ethical way and for good of the whole of the society.
Thank you very much. I'm absolutely satisfied. Are there any?
Yeah, thanks very much. I found this very interesting, myself coming from economic sociology and political economy, and your considerations reminded me of an approach in political economy called Varieties of Capitalism, introduced by Hall and Soskis in the early 2000s. And they make an argument that one of the factors that impacts on, among other things, corporate governance is the relationships between companies and banks and companies and the capital market, because they say basically, very roughly put, that there's a difference between a liberal market economy and a coordinated market economy, which consists in whether companies capitalize themselves through the stock market or through banks and taking credits. And this kind of reflects itself in different relationships between companies and banks. So I was just wondering whether you could elaborate a little bit more on this, on banks basically as a factor in shaping different varieties of corporate governance. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, it is one of the most important factors differentiating both models. I think Germany and Japan are the examples when banks play and used to play even more important role. For example, in Japan it was Keiretsu, and this organization was developing under the protection of the main of the bank. And so the bank was not only supplying the company with capital, with money, but also was diversifying risks of the company. Because its role was not only to supply the money if the bank wanted. And in Poland, for example, if the company is in trouble, so bank will not think how to help the company, only how to get out money that it lent to this company. In Japan, the bank had and in Germany, they have their banks have representatives in the supervisory board here and the board of directors. They are oriented towards rescuing the company, preparing special programs for developing another strategy. In Germany, banks have a very strong position because of the shares, not only as an owners of the shares, but also as a depositor of shares. So they can vote and they can lead the policy of the country. So it is very interesting topic and very complicated, and I hope that the banks cannot be only, let's say, rent-seeking entities.
Okay, thank you. I'm afraid that the time's up because we will have to finish our session just in time at 12 o'clock.